Hello and welcome to this video tutorial on how to paint or how to attempt to paint a Crmison Fist Marine. This is a suggestion. There are a few limitations, one of which we can't use an airbrush, and where possible we need to use Games Workshop paints. So cool, I like a challenge. Okay, so we've begun by taking the Primaris Marine and undercoating it in Halford's Black Primer. So it's a pretty similar one to the Games Workshop primer. Let's use a couple of coats just to give us a nice even basis. If the paint appears a little bit thick on this, this is unfortunately my test marine, so I keep re-priming over this again and again and again, so I might have lost a few details. First thing we want to do is take Cantor Blue. Now when we look at the colour, it's quite a deep dark blue. If we look at the colour wheel, we can see this blue is slightly closer to violet than it is the blue-greens. So we want to hang around this area, then in the highlights, to brighten it up, we want to stick to the blues. We can maybe use a little bit of blue-green right in the top highlights. So for this, I'll be highlighting it with Thunderhawk Blue. I don't think this will give us quite the same contrast we'll need, so I'll be using blue-green, which I believe is Lothering Green, through Games Workshop's range. I'll be using either Leviathan Blue, Drakenhof Nightshade, and Nuln Oil in the shadows. We may not end up using all of these, but I've broke them out just because. Then we have Corax White and Abaddon Black. Okay, so to begin the process, let's grab Cantor Blue. Let's pop up to the side. Give it a damn good shake, because these things settle. Okay, beautiful. First thing we want to do, well, we'll be splitting this miniature in half actually. We'll be showing two techniques for this. We'll be heavily dry brushing one side and showing how far we can get with that technique, and we'll be using more of a traditional base layer dry brush on this side. Okay, so let's bring up our dry brush. By all means, you can use the Games Workshop medium dry brush. However, for dry brushing, I really like using a big, bushy makeup brush. So if your significant other has a few of these lying around, well worth your time picking them up. I have a piece of paper here for dry brushing. Let's just drop the brush on the floor. Okay, so assuming that you may not have this brush, but you do have a dry brush, let's knock this off. Okay, let's take Cantor Blue. And we need this to be quite a heavy dry brush, so we don't really want to remove every single particle and pigment off this. Okay, yep, we'll be dry brushing this side. So I want to sweep it along the lines of the miniature. I've chosen to sweep it down this way. If I swept it down that way, it would go in between all the gaps of the miniature. By sweeping it across here, we ensure it only hits the top layers of armor. Okay, for the shoulder pads, as well. Nice big heavy dry brush. We want to cover up the majority of the miniature. We only want a little bit of it. Let me zoom in just a touch. We only want a little bit of the underlying black primer to remain. Okay. Same process here. I'm dragging the brush down instead of across. If we dragged it across, it would go into all the gaps and recesses, spoiling the effect we're looking for. Okay, let's add a touch more paint. Knock some of it off. I could test it against the surface of whatever we've chosen to mount the miniature on. It could either be an old Tamiya paint, or it could be the Games Workshop holder. It could be any holder that you have. Instead of transferring straight onto the miniature first and maybe clogging up the detail, try on the base first. So let's drag this down again. Okay, I did drag the brush across here because I knew it would cut across here. Okay, might need to re-glue this miniature to save it coming off. Nice big aggressive dry brush to cover the majority of the miniature. Because we have black primer down already, there doesn't seem much sense in applying Canto Blue over every single little bit of this miniature. We can use the black primer to our advantage and give us a heads, well, just saves more time. Okay, right, transferring over to this side where we're doing a much more traditional, I guess, base layer highlight. Let's take the Canto Blue. We do need a palette. In this case, I'm using a much loved, not abused, a much loved palette. I'm thinning the paint ever so slightly down so it runs off the brush nicely. And then I'll be covering up every single nook and cranny of this side. I don't have to be careful at all. I can use my brush any which direction that I want to cover it up. And in the immortal words of Duncan, 2 thin coats should do the trick. Yep, I'm going to cut it here. I'll come back after 2 coats have been applied to that side. Okay, now that the miniature's bone dry, we can move on to the highlight. Let's first look at the dry brush side. So I've had a bit of a play off camera of the kind of tones we can create. I would advise using a blue-green, so find the equivalent in the Games Workshop range, which I believe is Lothran blue. Then we take Canto Blue and we mix them together 50-50. We can even keep them on the spectrum like this. So when we apply our first highlight, we use the darker blue concoction, and then when we come to the secondary highlights, we can use the slightly lighter one. Take your smallest dry brush that you own. In this case, this is the small Rosemary & Co. It has the rather charming name, the Eradicator. But a small dry brush from Citadel will also do the job. This is the only dry brush that I own from Games Workshop. There you go. So I'm just going to dab the paintbrush in here. I think I need a little bit more of the Lothran blue. I'm going to remove quite a significant amount of this. Same dry brush motion. I'm just trying to pick up on the very highest points of light. So I'm sweeping it down the miniature very lightly, very light pressure, and the aim is just to pick up on those hard surfaces. Now if it does look a bit grainy at this stage, no need to worry, that's where the washes come in later. With the gorget, I want to sweep up and down, not across. So I sweep up to pick on the edge of the gorget, and I sweep down to again do the same thing. Sweep across. I'm not sure what that bit of the helmet is called. It's kind of like his what's that hairstyle? A mohawk. Right, so I'm going to do the same thing, dragging it down. Now on these rounded surfaces it's hard to know exactly where to place your edge highlight, or where exactly to highlight. What I'd suggest, drag down the miniature and we could almost use it in a stippling motion. So when we drag it across, it highlights it naturally. Drag it on the base. Now I'm not going to do too much down there because I've just glued the miniature, but sweep the brush down and you can see it picking up on the hard edge. Same here, we want to sweep down. We are almost using this in a targeted manner. We aren't dragging it across the entirety of the miniature. Instead, we're targeting the sweeps just on the edge. Apologies if you hear a screaming little baby in the background. Okay. Same here, I can sweep up the miniature and down because I want to catch it on that hard edge. And I can even bring it down a couple more times to highlight the center piece. Look at that, just drag it down. How cool is that? Just a couple of sweeps of the brush and it's highlighted, and you're practically done at this stage. I mean, this is more than acceptable battlefield miniature at this point. We do need to paint that Crmison Fist, which gives them the name. Okay, I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive on the top here, on the rounded surface. I'm going to sweep it over again and again and again to highlight the top. Now let's have a look at the pauldron. I want the highlight to sit on the top. So I'm going to be quite aggressive, moving it back and forth on the top of his pauldron to highlight it. And again, if it looks a bit chalky at this stage, no need to worry, because that will be knocked back with later stages. Okay, with your Lothran blue, I would suggest adding a small amount of white at this stage. So give it down a good shake. And this will up the value, so the value is the scale from black to white significantly at this point. So we're aiming to highlight what we've just highlighted. Maybe a pinch more white. And this will look a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Chalky at this stage, because whenever we add white to something, whenever we add black to something, we desaturate the colour. So it will look a little bit chalky after the stage, but that's where the washes come in later. So I'm being very, very careful. I'm just targeting the top of the knee pad. Top of the knee pad there. In fact, the choppiness goes to almost create artificial battle damage, which is quite a nice after effect of the dry brushing process. So you can see I'm not really sweeping the brush across the surface, I'm more dabbing it at this stage because I don't really want to play around with the mid-tone. I just want to add those very sharp edge highlights to the piece to really define the edges. Drag it down, drag it across, drag it up. Wherever you see a hard edge, try and think how the brush moving over the surface will affect it. Okay, maybe a little bit here. So because that portion underneath the knee pad will be so hard to capture, I'm instead going to add traditional edge highlight. Taking the brush, want to thin down the paint ever so slightly so it slips off the brush. I'm going to then, this is a 000 Winsor Newton Series 7, so the small Games Workshop brush, as long as it comes to a good point, will be able to achieve a similar effect. And hell, if you're just going for tabletop, you don't even need to do that. Okay, small little edge highlight here. Using the side of the brush, I'm just running it along the edge of the piece. And in fact, since we're at it, any other pieces that I want to clarify, I will at this stage. Okay, any minor mistakes that you make, just rub them off with your finger if you're quick enough. Okay, and that's it for the dry brush side. Let's move on to the non-dry brush side. Okay, into the shadows we need to add some Nuln oil. So let's open this up. Paint it straight from the bottle. Just need to clean up my eradicator brush before we move on. Okay, let's take a Rosemary & Co. number 1. So I believe this is a small brush or detail brush from Games Workshop. I'm not sure with the nomenclature that they use with their brushes, the naming conventions that they use. But anyway, I'm very carefully trying to run this Nuln oil into the recesses, any artificial shadows that we see. If some of the detail is a little bit soft, or you're unsure exactly where to put it, you can always use Lamia Medium as a guide. So with a shoulder pad, for example, because the detail's a little bit softer between the connecting portion of the shoulder pad and the arm, and the decorative portion of the pauldron, I could take some Lamia Medium, thin it down, and roll it between the gap, and this creates a pathfinder. So this will allow the paint to slip into those areas, and it also means that the paint takes longer to dry. So if we make any mistakes, we can gently brush over them and push the pigment where we want it to sit. But that side is really not necessary if you have good brush control. Just drag nano oil into all the gaps. And you can see by just the depth that simply eludes the traditional color brush and wash system. In my opinion. Okay, so now we've added null oil into all the recesses. We need to allow it some time to dry. However, we are busy people. We need to be getting on with our day, and I've just remembered that the pauldrons will also be blue. So I'm going to add a very fine edge highlight to the top and bottom portion of the shoulder pad. I don't need to do the entire thing. Like, I'm not going to edge highlight the shadow here because it does naturally fall into shadow. Just want to suggest the highest points of light, and voila. Okay, now chalkiness. It is a problem when we dry brush things. How do we get rid of it? Well, beautiful thing, washes or Games Workshop contrast paints. I'm not sure which one that you have in your collection. Let's go with the good old wash because it's there, and I think it's more likely we may have those in our selection. Good old Lamian medium to the rescue again. If you don't have this stuff, water will substitute. So let's just use water. We need to create a wash-like consistency. We need to drag this over the highlight. And you'll notice my brush stroke is always brushing it into the shadows. It's always dragging it over the highlight and into those shadows. That way, we remove chalkiness and deepen the shadow. All in one. So let's have a look at the... oh, I've got blue paint on my face now. Let's have a look at the... whatever this thing is called. So I'm going to start over, brush it down. Brush it down. So even though it does capture the highlighted portions, we're dragging the pigment away from it, leaving those sharp edges in place, creating a rather spiffy blue. You can even cheat a little bit as well by dabbing very lightly with your finger on top. Okay, the more rounded portions, it's the same process. It's exactly the same process. So we need to move it over shadows, and you know what? You can even dab our finger on top, and voila. Combining finger painting, glazing, washing, every technique you can think of. And this should remove any chalkiness that we see. And this would be my preferred methodology for painting the blue of the Crmison Fists. Because it's nice, quick, simple, and gives an amazing result. If you wanted to bring this up to if you're painting a character, for example, we could come back to our highlight stage and introduce really top edge, sharp edge highlights. So let's add a little bit of the white scar to the Lotharan blue, drag our brush to a fine point, and let's add a very, very top edge highlight here. These are known as specular highlights, so it's where the color almost becomes pure white in these little dots to really drag our attention to these areas. Only put these on the very top highlights. So put on the top of his mohawk, top of his eye, top here. Top there and there. Top of his knee pad here. Top of the knee pad here. Dot of light. Oh, that's a bit too much. No, we could dot it very quickly with our finger. I never. Did you ever think you'd be finger painting the miniature? Okay, we're going to change the angle of the miniature. Drag it across. You can substitute this for cork, or even better, if you've glued on the base, you can simply use the Games Workshop miniature holder. And this will allow you access to all different kinds of areas. Okay, a little top highlight here. A little top highlight here. Here, and let's put a pinch here as well, because we have that really nice line of light along there. For the backpack, let's do the same. So bring the highlight here, top here. Okay, and to be extra special, concentrate on the face. We want to just add that little dab under here. And ooh, you know what? I did this off camera, but I should show you. So when adding a specular highlight here, because a lot of light would cover the top portion of the surface here, we could even connect the two specular highlights. And that will give an extra dimension to your work by just connecting them like that. How cool does that look already? How long have we been recording for? I'm not sure, like 20 odd minutes? Okay. Crmison Fist. There's a reason why they're called Crmison Fist, because they have red hands. Let's have a look at what we can do here. Right, let's see what Games Workshop paints I have. We have corn red, good old corn red. Open this up. Okay, so over this beautifully highlighted and blended fist, we're going to add this. So a nice, good, even base coat across the top, and we need to be careful at this point because I don't want this red getting in between the gaps. So I'm using the tip of my brush to just stab it at the miniature. We need a nice, even, consistent coat. You know what? One coat will even do here, but don't constrain yourself like that. If you need to do two, by all means do two. Two thin coats is better than one. So I'm being very careful here. Don't want that sliding into the gaps and recesses. Ooh, you know what? We can get his eye as well while we're at it. Corn red. Very menacing for a super duper totalitarian warrior from the future. Okay, we're going to allow this to dry. And we're going to be applying a liberal coat of Flesh Tearers Red. If you don't have this, the Games Workshop's Karasborg Crimson will also do beautifully. So whichever one you have in your wheelhouse, that's what you use. I've blasted with a hairdryer. Oh, which one shall we use? Let's go Karasborg Crimson. Why not? Okay. A nice liberal layer of this over the fist. And we don't want any to really pool on the surface, so I'll glide the brush across to remove any excess paint. Let's get the eye as well. I'm going to blast this with a hairdryer and be right back. Okay, next up, we want to return back to corn red. And this time, we only want to hit the edges. So in this case, I want to hit the edge here. Make this quite a wide highlight, a wide fat highlight. Adding dots here to reinvigorate it. Okay, and next up, I did promise you we're only using Games Workshop colours, or where possible only using Games Workshop colours. So we want to use Blazing Orange, a paint that's been out of production for about 30 years. 20, 30 years. I'm sure there's a colour equivalent. I believe it's Wild Rider right now, or was something along that. It's a reddish orange. Tip of the brush. Glide this along the edge. So I'm primarily using the edge of my brush to pick up on the edge of the miniature. You know what? I bet a few of you even have this colour. A few dots here and there. If you make any mistakes, so if the highlight's a little bit too fat, you can always come back with your corn red. There you go, that's how you do the fist. Now to correct any mistakes I've made, let's take the corn red. Yeah, correct mistake. Okay, let's do the other side, shall we? Okay, let's do the other side that we're more traditionally painting with the colour block and wash. Ooh. Do you want to continue on with this, or is that good? I don't think we're going to get a result like this. Dry brushing for the win. I did promise you. Right, okay, so we've hit this with Nuln Oil. Let's take, again, Lothran Blue with Cantor Blue, 50-50, and we can keep this on the spectrum. So, Cantor Blue up top, Lothran at the bottom, and there's a connector between them. We need to make this quite a fat highlight. This needs to be the darkest of our highlight colours. Let's concentrate on this piece. I'm using a number 1 Rosemary & Co. But anything that comes to a really nice sharp edge will do the trick. Highlighting, edge highlighting has never been my favourite technique. I don't think it gives the most believable of end results, but I know people like it, so here's how you do it. Nice big fat edge highlight covering the majority of the edges. Then we increase the amount of Lothran Blue. We use the tip of the brush to highlight within what we've just done. Let's add a touch of white to this. For the top. Like so. I'm not going to do the rest because that just bored me to tears, and when you could get a result like this in like a quarter of the time, why would you choose anything else? Might be a little bit arrogant on my part, I completely appreciate it, but if you know something works, why would you try to change it? Okay, and that is it for the Crmison Fist tutorial. Thank you very much for joining me. Hope you can gain something from that. And if you try this out on any of your miniatures, please send me through some work in progress pics. Please send me through the results. I'd love to see it. Thank you very much.